Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, in response to President Donald Trump's recent indications that Europe must take greater responsibility for its own defense, European Union leaders convened an emergency meeting in Brussels, where they agreed on a historic plan to bolster defense spending. Now, this initiative shows the EU's commitment to strengthen its defense posture amid the threat of Russia. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss these developments is Róbert Gönczi Analyst at the Migration Research Institute. Sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Great to be here.
So when it comes to EU bolstering its defense posture, one of the most significant things is this rearm Europe plan proposed by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how that is going to help address the current defense challenges?
Yes, of course. So it was basically a 500 billion euros pack that was agreed for the next 10 years, which would focus on increasing defense efforts in order to make Europe possible to protect itself, because currently we see a different trend regarding the transatlantic relationships, and we see a generally different overview of the European-American relationship than from the previous administration of Joe Biden. Now, under Donald Trump, there is indeed a greater focus from Washington, D.C. towards Europe to be able to protect themselves. And for that matter, this new pact that was agreed on will focus on strengthening the national defense capabilities, setting up a new defense bank, and focusing on matters regarding the eastern borders of the European Union, where currently the European Union has seen several different threats regarding their security, most notably the war in Ukraine that is still currently going on, and of course the threat from Belarus, and of course from Russia as well in the Baltic states and in Finland.
Like you mentioned earlier, this is a very significant project involving 500 billion euros, and Ursula von der Leyen is also talking about potentially having a total of 800 billion investing into this project altogether. Do you think economically that is going to be something feasible to be done, and do you think that these world leaders within the European Union have the political will to carry it out?
That's a very great question you ask, because currently we see that the European states should focus on their security not only from the NATO itself, where there is also already a very high responsibility to reach the 2%, or it seems like maybe even more now. Certain states starting to propose that new taxes should be introduced to the population. For example, the Estonian foreign minister mentioned that maybe they will introduce a new tax for the population implicitly for the cost of the defense. Now, this can turn into a European trend, but also at the same time focusing on defense on the European Union level as well. Now, this is a very new situation. It has never seen before. But if we recall, European leaders has called for a strong European united forces for more than a decade now. And now it seems like the perfect opportunity to do that. So, of course, we will see how reality turns out. We see Europe in a very harsh economic situation with competitors arising from every part. Meanwhile, seeing a United States which is not longer very interested in and very invested in the protection of its European allies. Now, we also see that the United States has declared the withdrawal of their troops from, for example, the state of Kosovo. So we will see a lot of different changes in the European continent soon, which all indicates that a stronger focus on defense should be on the schedule for European leaders.
All right, speaking of withdrawal of troops from Kosovo, there's also a report from the various media outlets saying that there is also a possibility of some troops withdraw from European countries, especially those stationed in Europe during the Biden administration. And there's also talks about potential troop withdrawal from Germany as well. How much do we know about that, and how is that going to affect the European defense in the short and long term?
Now, it's unclear yet that what it will explicitly mean for the European continent. What we know currently, that the focus has shifted from a general support of defense capabilities through the transatlantic to declaring quick solutions to problems. Now, this is what we see from the Trump administration currently. They don't see the European defense as an investment as their previous administration. Now we see focus on quick solutions like we see from the US-Russia talks, which interestingly the European partners doesn't really know much about. So we can only guess what was said on the phone between President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So we currently see that in order for Europe to make sure that their rights are protected in the continent, a more defense-focused approach should be in the focus. And we see that from different thoughts that are circulating around the European institutions. Like currently there is this discussion whether the position of Kaja Kallas, who is currently the representative for the foreign and security policy for the European Union, should be considered a general foreign minister for the European Union. Now this also a discussion, but we see the main difference between the European Union and the United States, of course, is that it's not that unified as the elite in Washington. So we see different standpoints and viewpoints from all across the European leaders. And what Ursula von der Leyen's Commission generally says is not necessarily reflecting on all member states. Like we see Slovakia and Hungary declare that they are not supporting all the indicated factors regarding defense in this summit. And of course, we also see the debates regarding, for example, the Migration Pact, where we see different outcomes from all European states, especially from the Netherlands and Poland. So we can consider that currently there is a lot of talks regarding how defense should look like in the European Union, but there is no one standpoint that all European countries would follow.
Right, so when it comes to this rearm Europe plan, do you see this as a more collective project of like an EU-wide bolstering of defense as a unit, or do you see it being a plan for individual countries to strengthen their own defenses, given, like you mentioned, there's a lot of different kind of strategic goals, aims, and way of doing things between EU countries?
There is a lot of different cooperations currently going on in the region. We see more talks regarding defense in areas that are most affected by the conflicts near the European Union. But of course, once and for all, we have to make it sure that we have to make it clear that in the European Union, generally, defense is something that is exclusively up to the states. Currently, the discussion is regarding that whether the European countries should pursue a different approach and start to cooperate on a level that once one country starts to build up their defense more, all European countries would reply with the same effects. Now, this is highly unlikely right now, but the talks currently going on regarding that. But of course, once we see how the presented ceasefire regarding Ukraine is going to look like, because currently there is talks that the EU, UK and Ukraine are going to present a joint ceasefire plan to the United States for their US-Russia talks. And regarding the successful nature or unsuccessful nature we're going to see of this ceasefire plan, we can decide further in the future whether a more stronger cooperation, a more centralized cooperation regarding defense should be approached in the European continent. But currently there are only talks and there are a lot of disagreement between the European Union member states.
All right, and speaking of working together, France, Emmanuel Macron has just mentioned extending its nuclear capability for the collective defense of the European Union for like a European nuclear deterrence. How likely do you think that is to be carried out?
Now, we should see regarding the French President Emmanuel Macron that a lot of different defense-focused thoughts he shared in this summit. Also, we should mention that he introduced, together with guest country United Kingdom's leader, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that they're going to present the idea of sharing peacekeepers with Ukraine. So we can currently see that, especially in this situation where after the election we see a very weakly led Germany, that the French president is trying to take control of the European Union and trying to show power as the strongest leadership in the alliance. Of course, this is once again mostly talks, but it's very interesting to see how the communication between the leaders are starting to be shaped by the leadership of France, and how it might affect the outcome of ideas. But once again, we have to make it clear that first the situation in Ukraine shall be dealt with, and that mostly relies on the discussion between President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Right, like you mentioned, the topic of Ukraine is probably also going to shape how Europe approaches its defense going forward. But even if it does indeed result in any sorts of peace deal, does that mean also with the U.S. taking less part in NATO collective defense that European Union still need to reconsider its defensive posture?
Yes, of course, necessarily. After all, Europe should start to think about the next 4 years as a different approach from Washington, and try to come up with a solution that how the next 4 years should look like. We see a more transactional approach from Washington, D.C. than a value-based approach. Now, the value-based approach should be that the transatlantic community shares their basic democratic principles, therefore it should be protected. Now, that doesn't work with Donald Trump. But we see that Donald Trump is very reactive in the office, and he reacts to all possible outcomes if he sees an opportunity in it. Generally, we can say that his mind as a president works like a mind of a businessman. So whether the European Union and its leaders can present any solution how it can be beneficial for the United States to invest in the European defense, then this very strong collaboration can move on. Now, that's one problem that we currently don't have the answer for that yet. And the other problem is the Emmanuel Macron problem that I previously mentioned, that currently there is not a real strong leadership in the European Union. Last time, when there was a very strong leadership in the European Union, was under the reign of Angela Merkel as Chancellor of Germany. Currently, there is no that strongly appreciated and well-known leader in the European Union. We see a struggle and a squabble between France's leader Emmanuel Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, Giorgia Meloni from Italy, and of course the upcoming German Chancellor, that possibly is going to be Friedrich Merz, but we currently do not know its coalition partners as the CDU-CSU yet. However, of course, we have ideas regarding the Social Democrats.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.